Titan of Mediation, an interview with Dr. Joseph Folger, part of the series Manousso Musing with seasoned mediator trainer Dr. Barbara Manousso. That is our topic for today. Welcome to the Lawyers and Mediators International Show and Podcast by InstantMediations.com, where we discuss law and conflict resolution topics to educate both professionals and everyday people. Catch regular episodes on YouTube, the Instant Mediations app, and anywhere you get your podcasts. Just remember, nothing in these episodes constitutes legal advice, so be sure to talk to a lawyer, as cases are fact-dependent. Hi, everyone. This is Mac Pierre-Louis, attorney, mediator, and arbitrator, working throughout Florida and Texas.
And Natalia Ołowska-Czajka, advocate, mediator, and arbitrator from Warsaw, Poland.
And I'm Dr. Barbara Sunderland Manousso, based in Houston, Texas, and Rhode Island. And today I am just delighted that Dr. Joseph Folger is our guest on as the Titan of Mediation. And he is the president of the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation.
Thank you. It's great to be here. It's great to be here with people who have fellow Polish ancestry. Wonderful.
To explain more of that, I am based in Poland, and in the chat we had before this, I was so surprised that mediation has so many fathers and mothers that have their ancestry in Poland. Dr. Folger has Polish ancestry, and Dr. Manousso does, and Mac is very much befriended with Poland, so that's also something that brings us together.
Yes, it's wonderful.
So today I'd like to introduce Dr. Folger because we have a lot to talk about. He has been really one of the revolutionary theorists of our time in mediation, and he now is a novelist. So he has a lot to bring to our conversation today in this program. So could I take a moment and just explain a little bit about Dr. Folger's wonderful background? He's a professor emeritus of adult and organizational development at Temple University and the former chair of the Department of Policy, Organization, and Leadership Studies in the College of Education. And he teaches courses in conflict theory, third-party intervention, and group decision-making. Dr. Folger has been the co-founder, and we already said the president of the Institute for the Study of Conflict Transformation, and he's been a consultant to mediation programs all over the world. And he has worked extensively as a third-party intervener in organizational, community, court, and small group disputes, and was a leadership coach in diverse organizations. So Dr. Folger brings so much of his ideology, his wisdom, and the premise that underlies conflict intervention within his work and ways of finding resolutions and solutions that are very satisfying to the parties. And now he's written books. The Promise of Mediation is absolutely a classic. We use it in all our training programs around the world. And he updated it in 2005. He originally wrote it in 1994. He's also written Working Through Conflict, Strategies for Relationships, Groups, and Organizations, and the Transformative Mediation, a source book. And now, part of our conversation today that I think is so exciting is that he has completed his first novel, a memoir of a misfit mediator. So for those of us who have been in this industry a long time, this is very exciting. And it, again, you've become a revolutionary theorist and titan for mediation by taking your information and bringing it into this format. So Natalie, please.
Thank you so much. And it really is a pleasure. And I know that I am speaking on behalf of all of us, because actually it's also a little bit intimidating to be able to speak to someone with such a great authority all over the world in
Yes.
the
So,
world of mediation. So we are honored, we are delighted. And having said that,
well, thank you
and
for
also
the
we are very
opportunity.
and thank you for being there, even though today, as we are doing this, there is so much snow around you, and you are able to nevertheless uh, be here and have the connection, have the power to be with us in terms of physical power, meaning electricity, but also the power to be with us and enlighten us with the things that you can share. So, I wanted to ask you something really general. Having read the novel, and I perceived it as some sort of portraying a struggle of a mediator, finding their own way of being a mediator, but also being someone applying those rules that he knows from mediation in their real life. And one of the concepts that transpired is, and what the main character is dealing with, is the concept of a mediator as being someone liking the conflict, liking controlling the conflict, and therefore also controlling the mediation. Is it something that is provocative for the reader to make them think more about it? Or is it a clue that you want to give to a reader?
Well, it's a great question, and I really appreciate the opportunity to talk with you and all of you about this novel that has just come out in December. The question is a good one because it's at the heart, in some ways, of mediation practice, isn't it? In other words, do we as mediators try to control people's lives? Do we as mediators try to tell them what's best for them? Do we try to control their ability to speak in ways that we think is good for them to speak in? Or do we actually put those decisions to the parties themselves? And I think you're right in seeing that the mediator is struggling with the relationship between what he does as a mediator in conflict and how he handles his own conflicts in his personal life. That was one of my goals. I didn't have a whole storyline in mind when I started drafting the novel. I just had certain vignettes and incidents in my life that happened both professionally and personally. But I knew that I wanted to write it in such a way that it would show the connection between a mediator's personal conflicts and those that he mediated in his professional career as he's growing and trying to develop as a mediator. I don't think there should be a wide chasm between those two things. I think we as human beings are both struggling with how to act as our profession requires us to, as well as how we behave in our own conflicts. And so that was definitely a strong theme. And the issue of how much control you take over people is a central question in the book for sure.
Yeah, let me follow up. Thank you so much for the novel. When I was going through it, I got a suspicion that one of your intentions might be to, in a way, teach mediation or teach concepts from mediation, and through the novel, and inter you know interplay different themes that we mediators know into the novel, so that when we as a mediator is reading the novel, we can put ourselves into the shoes of this one individual, of the main character. Certainly for me, I was able to do that because some of the struggles he goes through, let's say when he's doing a mediation between the gang members, um, when he asks a question of whether or not this case he was dealing with was actually mediable. Okay, I've wrestled with that as well. So was that one of your intentions, that you wanted to, I guess, teach people mediation concepts and skills through the novel, doing it in a different way that we're not really used to?
Well, it's interesting because I wouldn't say that I was trying to do that, but I think because I'm a professor at heart, anything I write comes across as instructive for people. And I was drawing from real experiences. All of the cases in the novel that I talk about, the main character, Kent, he wrestles with how to deal with it, were real cases, either my own or other people's cases, that had occurred and did raise challenges for the mediator, either myself or other people. And so I wanted that to be part of what the reader was, getting out of it. what is the struggle that mediation sometimes raises? What are the different types of challenges that mediation poses for mediators? Because I think that that's an important thing. I wasn't trying to write, though, a case study book, and I wasn't trying to write something that was going to be a manual of any kind. But I have a friend, for example, who is not a mediator. He knows that I was a mediator, but he'd never talked to me very much about it. He read the novel and liked it, and he said, "I'm sure it's a masterclass in mediation for mediators."
Yeah.
So you're right that it does raise issues in a very poignant way. Some of those issues have been raised in the social science literature and articles, but I wanted to write for a general public. And so I wanted to be an introduction to mediation, not just for mediators, but for other people, because people who have no knowledge of mediation, because there's so much misunderstanding out there about what mediation is. And even one of the chapters raises that question about someone who just substituting arbitration for mediation in their own mind, and I see that all the time. And so part of my goal was to write something that would be interesting for people who aren't mediators and would also teach them something about the mediation process.
Dr. Folger, the book is very interesting, and I've known you for a long time. I've read everything that you've written prior to this book more than once, and require other people to read whatever you've written more than once, because you know how to make the concepts come across, you make them attainable, you make them usable, and not everybody can do that. I really think that has been part of your strength and your legend. You are so well received and so well respected in the industry. Some of the book, the names, I found that of interest. Kent. Could I glean that we have a little bit of Clark Kent going on there? Tell me why you named the people what you did throughout the novel.
That's very interesting. I think what I did was I drew on people that I knew and I changed their names slightly. So there is somebody who is close in name to Kent Fox that I knew for many years, but that is not his name. And same way with the other people, characters in the novel. And so people started reading it who I knew to find out if they were in the book.
So you use that as a sales technique and a hook to get people to read your novel. That's very clever on your part.
But I wanted to say one thing, if I could, Barbara, that
yes.
From your first comment, I think the reason that I and Professor Bush and others that I've worked with and wrote with are so good at bringing concepts across, if we are, is because that, we are practitioners at heart.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't get involved in this just to have a topic for an academic career. I started as a volunteer mediator at a center in Madison, Wisconsin, when I was at the University of Wisconsin, as a third-party intervener, and then I worked as an intervener in Ann Arbor when I got a university job. And we have worked closely with practitioners like yourself over the years to get feedback and to help develop the trainings and to do it. So we've been so fortunate to have wonderful, thoughtful practitioners who could pick these ideas up and contribute to the development of them. But I think that link between theory and practice comes from our background as practitioners and the fact that we care about the practice. We don't just care about ideas, we care about how they translate into professional lives.
And I appreciate that. And I appreciate you sharing that information. One of the things that I always find of interest is how people got to where they are and what mediation, when you were a little boy running around a playground, you probably never said, when I grow up, I'm going to be a mediator. People are going to be a doctor, lawyer, Indian chief, but they don't think about mediation as a very particular area. And something brought you to Wisconsin and volunteering and working in this area. So can you give a little bit? I think if young people, especially if they're listening, sometimes they feel very compelled when they're very young to make a decision where they're going. who they're going to be and not ready for it. So somebody of your caliber, I think if you would mind sharing a little bit about your background, where you've come from, and how you got to where you are, because so much of you gleams through the book. And I'm just going to put one little seed there. What you don't know by talking with Dr. Folger right now, but you will in a second, he's also a professional ballroom dancer.
Was.
Was. Well, that's all right. Once you are, you always are. But you have a very interesting journey. So could you talk a little bit about your experiences? You just did a little bit, but what made you mediate the first time? What brought you into this arena? What was the flow? What was the journey that you had?
Well, if you go way back, I think even before I made any professional decisions, I think that I came from a family where diversity was respected. And I had a mother who was very, very supportive of all her kids in different ways. And so I think I saw somebody close up who could live with difference and not be judgmental and not be somebody who is, claiming something's better than something else with her children or grandchildren and other people. So it was partially my upbringing, I think, to give me that disposition. I was studying communication as an undergraduate, and I was involved in debate and arguments and things like that. And so I was studying ways in which people speak about and intervene and interact in conflict. And then when I got to graduate school, that's when a friend of mine said, "Do you want to join the Center for Conflict Resolution," which had been set up during the Vietnam War era. Madison, Wisconsin was a hotbed of protest, and there were deaths there because of a bombing of a building. The history there is interesting, but this center was set up to try to bring peace in the community in Madison, Wisconsin. And so I volunteered there, and that's where I got the practitioner base of what I do. And I think it was because I trusted this friend. And I also had a disposition which fit well with doing conflict intervention. And once you get involved in it, you can really learn a lot, and you see the power of supporting people's ability to talk to each other. And that just convinced me that this was worth studying professionally.
Well, that's very interesting. Thank you.
Thank you for that. The reference Dr. Manousso just made with regards to the ballroom dancing, I think one of the characters, I think his name is Zhao. He's
Yes,
a ballroom
it's in the book.
dancer. Yes, in the book, and so that came to mind. So,
And by the way, I am too, and I think that does a lot in mediation because it's also about music. It's about listening, so it's
That's
also about being
fantastic.
sensitive.
Well, and it's
So,
about sharing space with the partner.
oh yes, and also about control. That was my experience from dancing.
And Natalia, I have to add to this, and Joe knows this, I also was a professional ballroom dancer. I taught ballroom dancing for over 30 years and did exhibition ballroom. And Joe and I found that to be amusing as a common denominator many years ago. But when I saw it in the book, I got a tickle out of it. So I was excited. I look for the symbolisms, and I like the little nuggets. And you didn't disappoint me. I had all my symbolism and my little nuggets. Mac, you were trying to say something. I'm sorry.
Oh no, it's okay. What's exhibitionist ballroom dancing? Anyway, that we'll talk about that later.
The competitions or on television. I danced
It just sounds
television.
wrong. That's all. But no. So overall, how does and I think you kind of answered the question, so you took a little bit of my thunder away, but how does what you wrote in the book connect with your personal overall I guess professional worldview when it comes to your theories and philosophies and concepts of mediation? This broad question.
Yeah.
And before you continue, one of the questions that you had the main character ask, or the main character has to answer for himself and keeps asking throughout the novel, is who am I? And forgetting how to say it correctly, who am I, and what is important to this person, or who is the party that I'm trying to mediate for?
Yeah.
Can you connect that with your own professional worldview when it comes to why you write a novel?
Well, it really stems exactly from that. I think when we talk about transformative mediation, which is, by the way, never mentioned in the book, you'll probably notice, it's just talking about behaviors and actions of mediators and the controversies around some of those sometimes. But when I think about the work in mediation that we've done, I think of two concepts that center the whole vision around. One is self-determination of the parties. In other words, it's so important that mediation be a place where people get to make their own decisions. And if you think about it, that space is small because there's so many processes like arbitration and courts and hearings that take power away from people to make their own decisions. And so we have really stood behind that concept 100%, sometimes to the point of controversy, because I sometimes say to mediators, you have to be comfortable that a party might make a decision they regret later. And if you're not able to be in that mindset, then you're going to be taking control, as you were pointing out, Natalia, and you're going to be trying to protect parties from their own bad decisions in your view. So that is one of the key concepts. The other key concept is the power of dialogue. That when people sit face to face or interact with each other over issues, it's sometimes very difficult, but light bulbs go on. People think differently. People realize there was more to the story. People realize that they had some assumptions that were not correct. And you don't have to lecture them on that. They find that out by interacting with the other person. And if you take the dialogue away, then you're taking away a huge valuable aspect of what mediation can offer. And there are mediators who do that. I know some mediators who say in family and divorce mediation, you can never let the parties in the same room.
Terrible.
Because it gets too emotional, and they say, we've never been trained on how to deal with emotions and conflict. Well, what conflict is not emotional?
Absolutely.
And so they take away that piece of mediation, that cornerstone of the potential power of dialogue. Now, sometimes it doesn't transform, sometimes it doesn't happen, sometimes people don't listen to each other. But even then, when they leave the room, sometimes the light bulbs go on, and we don't even know what happened afterwards. But if we don't preserve those two aspects of mediation, then we really are not preserving something that's unique, that what mediation can offer that's different from other intervention methods. And I think those themes come up during the novel as well.
They definitely do. And this is why I wanted to ask you so much about the empowering power of mediation, empowering the parties. But I also believe that empowering the mediator when he was able to lead the parties through their emotions and through the conflict. And we know that. But how do we get with this message to the world? It is about some sort of a marketing question for mediators, which is also of interest to our listeners and viewers who are mediators. Because once you already understand the miracle of mediation, when you have the abilities to do that, when you know you are good at it, the question is how to get through to people who you know that you would need it, but they are not even aware that such a thing as mediation exists or what mediation can do for them.
Yeah, well, and of course, as you read the novel, the very last chapter raises that issue. How do you show to people what goes on when it's not a main character telling people what to do? And can people value that? I think, first of all, they have to experience mediation in such a way that does feel unique to them, that does feel like this was something I wouldn't get anywhere else. I feel really sad sometimes when people go to mediation and they tell me afterwards, I would never come back to a mediator. And I say, why? And they say, because they didn't let me say what I wanted to say. They were sort of telling me what I had to do. They were focused on a settlement when I wanted to talk about things that had happened in the past between us that got us to this place. And so we have to put out models of this that people really aspire to, because the best way to build a following is through experience, through word of mouth. So that if people go to a mediator and have a very good experience, even if they don't reach a total agreement, that they feel they were heard and listened to by the mediator, if they feel that they were allowed to say what they wanted to say, if they're offered the opportunity to ask questions that they weren't asked, couldn't ask before, all the things that are at the center of self-determination, then people spread it by word of mouth. And so the centers that are working in that way, I think, get more business, not because it's required by the courts, but because people want to use it.
And I agree so much with you. Your style, of course, is called transformative because it does transform relationships, and it might even transform the parties themselves on how they viewed what they had experienced. But I think overall, what you have brought to the world is that you have best practice. And if you really look at what the ethical standards are with the American bar or different states, you'll see that your process is the framework or fits the framework of what the intent of mediation should be. So for that, the applause and the accolades, there are not enough. So,
well, thank you. What's
thank you so
interesting, Barbara, is that I think mediators want to practice in a good way, but the institutional pressures that they're under, depending on where they practice, make it very challenging and make it very difficult. And that is a theme in the book as well. And I have some friends of mine and colleagues who've read the book, who read the novel, and said to me that, this is a book about mediation. At least that's the professional setting for the characters. But actually, they were comparing it to their own professional lives in medicine and higher education and other places. And the institutional pressures that are on people, for example, in the medical field, to have to deal with so many patients each day, and to make money and not spend time talking with patients because they only get 15 minutes per person. Those types of things are destroying professions and destroying people's lives in the way that you don't get what a true doctor can do with you to help build your confidence and to help understand what's going on with you, just as one example. So I think that, I think the book resonates with people who are not mediators in some ways that we don't even think about in the mediation field, because they can see similar trends and challenges that are being presented to them in their own professional walk of life. Interestingly, other non-mediators who have read the novel said to me that they really resonated with the fact that the book is talking about how people give up freedom and start bowing to dictators and start relating to people who are going to take control of their lives and giving up their freedoms. And they do that for many, many different reasons. But this one woman read it and said, I could see that really at the base of what you're talking about is the same thing as people, moving towards some styles of leadership and control in life that are destroying their own sense of democracy, their own sense of freedom. So I never was trying to write that into the book, but people can see those threads. So mediation is in some ways a microcosm of a whole lot of issues that are going on beyond just the mediation field.
That's correct.
Absolutely. What Dr. Manousso just raised with you about institutional pressure, I think that's very important because, where I practice mainly whenever I'm doing the mediations, yes, it's absolutely the case in family mediations. You are supposed to start in caucus and end in caucus. That's become the practice, okay? And
Not with my
the parties
clients.
never get a chance to speak to each other. And so as a mediator, I'm under that kind of pressure myself, because now that all the attorneys in my jurisdictions have come to expect that, that's just how it's done. When they come to you and they say, whoa, 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 why are you moving us in different breakout rooms? Well, they expect that. And so as a mediator, you're now having to decide, okay, do you bend to the pressure and just split the parties up and start going at it that way? Or do you want to have some breakthroughs happen here and have transformation happen and get these spouses talking where they determine the outcome in a way that's just much more effective, I think. So yeah, totally in agreement. And I do see that theme played out in the novel. So we got just a minute left. We just could all go around and thank Dr. Folger for his time.
So I wanted to ask, not to add that, fortunately in Poland we still are the representative of the old school, meaning in my jurisdiction we start together, we do as much as we can to be together in one room, whether it's a virtual room or physical room, and we really try, and the emphasis is being done on the parties improving their communication. So dialogue, as you mentioned, Dr. Folger.
Yeah.
And
And
I
through,
have, this is, mhm,
and through communication, parties get to make decisions. We're not just there to train them to
That's right.
communicate. Better
And that is at
communication
the heart.
leads to the
Mhm.
decisions that are better for them.
but that is also when you improve their communications, one day they are done with their mediation and they go into the real life. If they improve their communication, this is something that stays with them. And this is really what transforms their lives. If they're able to communicate better, to really convey their ideas, to mutually agree on something.
I agree. It can be a learning experience, but it's not a learning experience if they're separated and never talk to each other.
And I also never bow to what somebody wants. I'm going to do what's right. And what's right is what the format is that Dr. Folger has recommended and taught for years. And I stick to that. If they want to go in separate rooms, I say, well, that's fine. We'll do that later. But let's sit down and start. And then they get into the process. They have a good conversation. They have a good dialogue. They have a good solution. People go, oh, that went well.
Yeah.
And
I
I
didn't know
just
we could have
smile and
that
thank
kind of
their hand, and that's the end of it.
I think
I
the
don't even
best
talk
compliment,
half the time. Sorry,
the best
doctor.
compliment we can get as a mediator is if after the mediation, people say to us, I never thought we could have that conversation, and now I know I can.
Absolutely. And that's the final word.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Wow, that was amazing. I learned a lot as usual. I appreciate you, Dr. Manousso, for bringing on Dr. Folger. And we're looking forward to have Dr. Folger back again. Okay, this is just an evolving, podcast, and we're
Can we let people know where to get the book?
yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for reminding me of that. So I will screen share real quick. Folks who are interested in getting this book can get it on the website transformativemediation.org. If you are listening to this podcast, again, that's transformativemediation.org. If you're watching, you can see it on my screen. Just click on the book and it's on the shop.
And the book
And
is A Misfit Mediator, Memoir of a Misfit Mediator.
exactly, right next to Dr. Folger's other works as well. And it's also on Amazon where I got it on Kindle. And so I think Kindle's the way to go because you can have Alexa read it to you and it will. That's how I did it. But appreciate you so much, Dr. Folger.
Thank you for
And
this opportunity. It was wonderful.
yes,
Thank
absolutely.
you. Nice seeing you.
All right, guys, signing off. Check us out on the Instant Mediations app where you can get this and all the other episodes with Dr. Manousso. Take care, everybody.